46 years ago, I set out to do the least practical thing a kid from Coos Bay, Oregon could do, which was to pursue a career as a jazz musician. And lo and behold, after many years of working at it, that's exactly what I've done. In that time, I have watched a lot of developments occur, which have sort of bit by bit eaten away at the various ways there are for someone to survive as a jazz musician. In the 90s, we had Napster and other file sharing services. And I remember having a conversation with Pat Metheny in the studio while we were making one of Mike Brecker's records. And Pat said it's going to come down to where all we have is live gigs and t-shirts. And it hasn't quite gotten there yet, but making money on recorded music has systemically gotten more difficult. In the 90s also, we had just pirate CDs. There was one particular guy in Cologne who would tape your concert when it showed on German TV and put out a CD of it. And we would go to the record store even in Tokyo. And amongst all the Brecker Brothers records that were in there were these ones that this guy had just pirated, pressed up a few thousand CDs, and they were in the record store with the records that we had actually made. But now there's a different level of this going on, and people have done really great reports on this. Rick Beato has some excellent and pretty horrifying YouTubes out there with either with his take on it or he's interviewing someone who's got some expertise in it. But as it pertains to jazz musicians, I thought I would register some thoughts here. With the advent of AI, I assumed that it would be difficult to generate something like a track of music with, a smoking band and a good singer and all that kind of stuff. And it sure didn't prove to be, did it? The things you can get out of these services like Suno are pretty shockingly good. And the first thing as it pertains to jazz musicians and just musicians in general is that all along the way, since I first moved to New York, there were really great plum gigs. There were Steve Winwood records. A friend of mine played keyboards on those, and Hall & Oates records and so forth. And, they would get Steely Dan records. Whatever it was being made in New York, there would be those great plum dates. But then there was also a whole lot of jingle work in there and other just sort of functionary work. There were, Muzak was made with live musicians. And it was a way to keep the lights on while you weren't working on, a best-selling album. That work, I think, is all gone or gonna be all gone. Because if you think about the model, it used to be that the ad agency would hire a composer to write a little jingle for their toilet paper or whatever it was, and he would write a couple jingles. You'd get 6 musicians into a studio that had an engineer and an assistant engineer there, and the musicians would get paid, and these things generated royalties. And, 9 different people got paid that way and kept getting paid to some extent, most of them. Nowadays, why wouldn't an ad agency, what coordinator or something, type some prompts into, Suno or another, AI music engine, tinkly, upbeat, toilet paper, and hit send, and it'll spit out 15 different jingles for them to listen to. They'll listen to 3 and pick the second one and call themselves the composer on it. And nowhere in that entire ecosystem does a musician make a nickel, even though the AI model was trained in a lot of cases on the music that these people have played all these years. So that is a major revenue stream, just the industrial work that we all used to do. I didn't do that many jingles, but a lot of people made a lot of money doing that. So, I put that number at maybe 50% of the work that was out there and it was a lot of great musicians. Often it was Steve Gadd and Will Lee and, or Chris Parker and, these amazing musicians, great piano players doing that stuff. But you would go to the union and collect a bunch of checks and then royalties. I knew one guy who did a Bic Pen ad that paid for 40 years. Will Lee is the singer on Be All That You Can Be. And has been paying him ever since then. So I worry about that collapse. It's not the glamour work, but it was a lot of work and it paid residuals. Now we fast forward on here and I'm starting to get AI jazz music, quote unquote, just in my daily feed. I was in the breakfast room at a hotel in Copenhagen, for example, just last year, and there was this irritating piano trio in there, and it had all the hallmarks of a piano trio. There's a guy wiggling his fingers on the piano, and there's a bass player going boom, boom, boom. And yes, sorry, bass players. But, it kind of sounded like jazz, but I knew it was AI just because it was insipid. It didn't make any sense. It's like if you took out the part of your brain that, contains your soul, but left the stuff that can make your fingers go like this. So I Shazammed it, and sure enough, there was no band, no record of that. On the other hand, I heard a kind of ambient tune one day, and I forget where it was. And I was like, gee, this is kind of nice. And I hit Shazam that one. And I believe that one was also AI. It was a distant trumpet. I thought maybe it was going to be Mark Isham or something like that. And it was, a band in Norway with like 3 followers or something like that. And it's like, really, how did I happen to hear this? If it's that obscure, pretty sure that was AI too. Now comes the next evolution of not just the industrial work that jazz musicians do, but the recorded work. Clarence Penn, a great drummer and a friend of mine from way back, posted on Facebook that he was surprised to find out that he's the part of the Dave Oakley trio, I think is what it's called. And they released a record called Misty Skies that had Clarence on the credits. And of course, Clarence isn't on this thing. And the striking thing to me about that was that one, for a jazz musician, if you get a couple 100,000 streams, you're pretty damn happy with that. It's very difficult to figure out how to get streams on Spotify and so forth. I sure don't know how to do it. But that one, the fake one, had 3.5 million streams on it. That's worth something between $10,000 and $12,000. And, real musicians would love to be making that kind of money. You put out a record and it's got 10 cuts on it and you make 70 or 80,000 bucks. That would be fantastic. But the real guys struggle to get anything remotely like that kind of number. And Spotify is pushing this out to people. And I think there's got to be something going on there. You know, I mean, look at Spotify. Why would they pay live guys when they can push this pablum out there? I listen to it and it's not good. To a public that might not know the difference. And why do they have to pay those nettlesome musicians in the first place when they can use AI, which was trained on Clarence Penn's playing in part, to generate something that they own so that they can make all the money themselves, and not even pay that third of a cent to the live artists. So then I see Benny Green, fantastic piano player from New York, one of those guys that I would say when I grow up I want to play like Benny Green, is talking about how, by golly, there's a AI record of him playing with Freddie Cole, who passed away years ago. A nice new record that Benny didn't have anything to do with. And again, you know, Benny has 32,000 subscribers, which is hard to do on Spotify. And some of his tracks are getting well up there in the hundreds of thousands of plays. And so he's seeing some money from that. But whoever is doing this, be it Spotify or some third party, is taking Benny's hard work, all the great playing, the profile that he's developed on Spotify, and leveraging it to get people to listen to these fake tracks of him and Freddie Cole that did a duo CD together that doesn't exist. And in Benny's explanation of this, he says that friends of his are saying it's appearing in their feeds. Nicholas Payton got in touch with him and said, you know, I just thought you should know that this, but how did he see it? It's because Spotify is pushing it out. And why are they pushing the fake stuff and you can't get them, hell or high water, to push the real stuff? So I didn't think that it could come for jazz musicians. I'll tell you this, it's also coming for the great film composers of our age. And what I fear is going to happen there is that similar to the way in which the ad people are just going to punch things into, at Suno or a similar engine and get something that they don't have to pay us for, that we're also going to have filmmakers, directors, producers, and so forth who don't appreciate the difference for themselves of having a live body, a human with a soul and a heart and a brain, interpret their scene and add an entire fourth dimension to it. Instead, for the temp track, at least they're going to type some prompts into Suno and they're going to generate a few options and they're going to find one that they kind of like, and then they're going to get demoitis, as we say, and they might never know how much better it could have been with a human doing it. And what's worse, the audience might never know how much better it could have been with a human doing it. Just as an example of the kind of person who I'm afraid will now be rolling his own music for films is a director I once worked with on an early, just barely feature film, the first one that I did, which is 52 minutes long, and the 50 minutes is the minimum to do a feature. A good filmmaker, good guy. I was working with him, and one of the cues that I sent him was, a piano-based thing with some ambient textures and stuff. It was kind of a light, a supernatural horror film. And he sends me back a note that says, I love it except for that thing that's going clang, clang, clang in there. And I was like, oh, wow, I don't hear anything going clang, clang, clang. So I took out a couple things that might have been going clang, clang, clang and sent it back. And no, it's still in there. And he only lived about 15 miles from me and just north of New York City. So I said, why don't you come over and we'll figure it out? So he comes over. I say, okay, so I'm gonna mute everything but the piano, and I'm gonna add elements in, and then you tell me when you hear the thing that's going clang, clang, clang. And so I mute everything but the piano. I play it. The piano starts playing. He says, "That's it." And Lord love him, that's a guy that doesn't even know a piano when he hears it. And I worry that everything is going to get so dumbed down that people won't even know what they're missing. We already hear library tracks being cut into a lot of the stuff that we see on streaming services. And again, it's a kind of a drone, and it does set a mood, but it sure doesn't move with the action, and I miss it. On the same tip, though, the live gigs, can they replace our live bodies? That might be the salvation of the jazz musician. I have been touring pretty well nonstop since 1986. I cut back when my kids were growing up, but now I'm back at it, 5 tours a year or something like that. And I hope that in the context of all this pabulum, this regurgitated, ground up, it's like musical spam or something that was once, a great cut of steak. But it's been reground by these AI engines and spit out to be something that a lot of people can't tell the difference of. But there's always going to be live gigs, and I would hope that the audience for those might actually go up as people, whether they recognize it or not, their lives become more impoverished by not having a human soul. And, for years we've had humans making music in computers, but it used to be that somebody at least had to, put in a drum part or something like that. Now there's not a human involved except for the corpses of the guys who donated their musical talents to be reground by an AI engine. So back to the live gigs. Still doing them, still a living to be made there if you do enough of them. But I worry that even if the appetite goes up, if people get even more eager to see talented human beings sweating up there with a heart and a soul, making music that means something, people with a story to tell, when I go see jazz music, I go there, and I always have gone there, to put myself in the hands of a master. My favorite one that I like to put myself in the hands of was Elvin Jones at the Village Vanguard. I saw Elvin there several times. Put myself in the hands of Dexter Gordon and not to be too corny, but let them strum, my face with their fingers or strumming my soul with their fingers. And even though I think that people might get more eager to have a human connection with their music again, I worry that AI is coming for so many jobs that white-collar people and blue-collar people alike who used to have some money that they could afford to come out and see us play, it's going to get so impoverished by AI that people can't afford it anymore. The CEO of Anthropic, Dario Amodei, is warning us that he sees between 25 and 50% of the white-collar jobs are threatened over the next 5 years. And he's a CEO of one of the leading AI companies. He was a founder of OpenAI. Goldman Sachs says that they expect 300 million jobs to disappear around the world as AI takes over everything it can take over. So, where does that leave us now? The whole thing of AI making music out of the music that we made all these years and regrinding it and selling it as their own, or letting you sell it as your own. I mean, not to be too dramatic, but it's almost like, at the end of the giving tree, that greedy kid saws down the branches to sell, to go to college, and then he comes back and saws down the trunk to make a boat to sail around the world. And then he comes back as an old man, and he sits on the stump, and the thing says, and the tree was happy. This is like these greedy billionaire oligarchs who run these companies are coming over to the stump after, it gave them everything they need to make these billions, and they just light it on fire so they can cook their filet mignon on it. So we are headed for very strange times here. It's a different world. Support live music as much as you can. When you're there, if the artist is selling t-shirts or CDs, or vinyl is super popular right now, support them that way. Because if you buy a vinyl record from them, they make $25, and I think you would have to stream it until the year 3000 for them to make $25 off you streaming it. So that is sort of the lay of the land as I see it. At some point, God help us, it should be illegal to put out a record of Benny Green and Freddie Cole and sell it and pocket the money. Last I looked, both those records, the Dave Oakley Trio, Misty Skies, is still out there streaming, and it's the Benny Green record is still out there. Who knows how many more of these there are out there? And this is what the billionaires are pushing. It's appearing, Nicholas Payton got it on a thing that said, because you listened to probably a fantastic playlist, you might want this. So I hate to be a downer, but this is the future as it seems to be unfolding. And, we're sure not going to get any progress out of this Congress. And, I don't know, it's a tough scene out there, and gonna get tougher, and not just for us, but for everyone who listens to us as well. So that's what you can do, is support the actual musicians as much as you can. It's gonna get to be more of a treat than it ever was to go see talented human beings on a stage. Take advantage of it as much as you can.